welcome you all to the first India Today Global Roundtable on the eve of the Indian Prime Minister's visit to the USA. We're going to spend the day discussing almost every aspect of the Indo-US relations with leading lights from both countries. There couldn't be a better time. India is on the cusp of great change. After 30 years, we have a single party with an absolute majority and a mandate won on the promise of development. Fortunately, it is headed by a Prime Minister with a clear vision for economic renewal. That too, a vision not held hostage to Nehruvian socialism, but a vision of good governance with minimum government. We have an energetic new government in India, and the US has a president approaching the second half of his second term, with somewhat preoccupied with the Middle East. Neither of us, I believe, are ever going to be fully ready. It is pointless, therefore, to search for the perfect timing. This moment is as good as any other as you would get. I leave you with that hopeful thought, and thank you all for coming. And as you say in this country, have a good one. Thank you.
Friends, Prime Minister Modi today represents a confident India of 1.2 billion people. It's a different India that we are seeing today. It doesn't bend backwards nor forwards. You will see a different Prime Minister who knows how to say no. We say yes also, but we say no also when it comes to protecting India's national interest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ram Madhav, for that keynote address. How do you see India and Pakistan extricate themselves from a corner into which they've been boxed by this new government?
To be assertive and to be mature are two different things. Yes, our government is a little more assertive when it comes to India's national interest. It has to be. We are here in power. We are elected to power, not to remain as a duplicate copy of the previous government. We have to be different. We are here to protect India's national interests with full commitment and vigor. But that should not be seen as any machismo or anything. That should not be seen as any provocative gesture towards our neighbors. It is this government's way of protecting its sovereignty, sovereign interests. Don't worry, the neighbors also will learn to live with this government. It's better that they learned it quickly.
How do you see India and China move given the concerns along the border?
Prime Minister Modi has made it clear that respecting this line of actual control is a prerequisite for any further dialogue on the border question. I do agree that there are some disagreements over some areas. But new areas are being opened up for dispute. This is a vexing issue between India and China. Good thing is, we are no longer talking about freezing the borders issue. We are talking about actually actively engaging with each other on understanding the issue, respecting the LAC, and finding a solution to it.
How do you deal with the ideological roots that the RSS has? Because you were till very recently the face of the RSS, and the RSS agenda vis-a-vis the BJP's BJP agenda, which voted it to power, which got it voted to power.
There is no radical fringe taking over of the matters in India. India is progressing. India is mostly peaceful. There is no right-wing extremism, etc., taking over the government or whatever, the way you are describing. No such thing is happening.
Your mother organization, RSS, has always been suspicious of foreign capital. Right? This is kind of symbolized by your opposition to FDI in retail. And I think that still continues. Now, is that going to change? Even, I'd like to bring to your attention that even e-commerce, which is such a booming industry in India, and you've just seen here in the US, Alibaba launching its IPO worth over $280 billion. But we are still stuck with FDI and retail not being allowed into India. What is your view on this?
FDI in retail is one area where further discussion is needed, further safeguards are needed, is the view taken not just by the RSS, but you may recall, by the BJP itself. The BJP's manifesto also says that while we welcome FDI in almost all other areas, certain safeguards are required in order to safeguard the interests of India's small businessmen, neighborhood shopkeepers, etc. Our real issue with regard to FDI in retail is that in India, almost 30 million people depend for their livelihood on these neighborhood shops, small-time shops. We have to make sure that they do not go jobless by allowing certain big companies into this area of retail. Let things change. Probably once we are able to confidently say that yes, this is no longer an issue for us, probably the party and the government may take a view on that. On allowing it today, yes, we are opposed to it. We see it as, having a harmful effect on the India's small businessmen and neighborhood businessmen. That's the position of the party today.
The biggest roadblock, as I see it, in India, in whether it be the corporations or whether it be the average NRI, non-resident Indian, is the corruption in the bloodstream of India.
I can reassure you that the man at the helm of affairs is not only just not corrupt, but incorruptible. Corruption flows from top to bottom. It doesn't flow from bottom to top. If the top man is clean, then corruption can be contained downwards. So we have a Prime Minister who is utterly clean, who is committed to probity, and under his leadership, I'm sure we will soon get rid of this, one of the national problems of India called corruption. I'm sure we will have a clean India very soon in that sense also.
My name is Nishit Desai. I'm an international lawyer. My question to you, what do you think about immigration? I think India and the US both are almost 60 majority service economy. I believe immigration is a worse form of protectionism and against human rights. Some point in time we need to get rid of it, except for the people which you will call bad capital, bad human capital. But I want your personal views on that as well.
Basically believing that presumably that laws should not restrict immigration, that you should have much freer flow of human capital across the two countries, right?
Right. And also human rights now include not only right to exist, but also to prosper. I think that's being recognized. So anyone should be able to move anywhere. We have 1 billion people. If you're 100,000 people walk in, I have no problem. We are small, but you might have to.
Well, it's one thing to say that we should change our immigration policies vis-a-vis India, and I agree with that. It's another to say we shouldn't have any checks whatsoever at our borders, that anybody who wants to come in can come in. That would pose a real problem for the United States. I think we have a fairly liberal immigration policy, but I think every country has a right to try to secure its borders to make sure those that are coming are here for appropriate purposes and for lawful purposes. But in terms of changing the policies toward India, I think that we have been engaged in very counterproductive action by restricting the amount of Indian people who can come and work here in the United States. I think that has to change.
So you'd like to see many more Indians come into the United States. You believe that there should be an immigration policy for the rest of the world, and there should be a separate immigration policy for Indians. Indians are a positive human capital.
I think that in terms of the positive human capital coming in, that you have much to contribute to the science and technology.
To reboot Indo-US ties. I'm not going to defend myself, I'm not going to criticize anybody, but I'm going to adopt a professional approach to addressing, which is the theme of our conference. How do you reboot? And this is a relationship that needs constant rebooting. And you really have to ask the question, why does a relationship require constant rebooting? And I think the biggest problem in our relationship is exaggerated expectations from each other. We expect many things from the US that the US can't deliver, and the US expects many things from India that India cannot deliver. And the reason for that, in my view, goes back to what a very famous American politician, Tip O'Neill, once said, that all politics is local. That the two open democracies, the United States doesn't recognize the political framework in which decisions get taken in India, and India very often does not appreciate the political framework in which decisions get taken in the United States. So I think the first thing that we need to understand is to have a sense of realism in the bilateral relationship. Rebooting has to be enduring. Rebooting cannot be episodic. And to have enduring rebooting, one must have a sober assessment of what each country can do. The second point I'd like to make, Rahul, is that both of us, the US of course is the preeminent power in the world, and India is an aspiring global power. Both of us are engaged in a bilateral relationship, both of us are engaged in regional partnerships, and both of us are part of multilateral frameworks. It's very important for both countries to create a mechanism by which we do not allow multilateral engagements or regional engagements to influence the course of our bilateral relationship. Let me give you an example. India's position on climate change may be different from that of the United States in multilateral forums. But India's position on climate change in multilateral forums should not affect the bilateral relationship. So I think the creativity of leaders will lie in trying to identify those areas where the bilateral relationship can deepen, while recognizing that on regional issues like Iran, for example, or Ukraine, for example, will differ, and certainly on international issues, our positions may differ. So differing positions are inevitable in the nature of our bilateral relationship. But that should not stand in the way of deepening the bilateral relationship in terms of commercial ties, in economic ties, in ties on higher education, and so on and so forth. So in short, I think our bilateral relationship does not lack substance. There are many things on which we can deepen this relationship. What it desperately needs is a style of engagement that enables both sides to be realistic about each other, both sides not to have a sense of exaggerated expectations from each other, and for both sides to engage in bilateral dialogue while maintaining different positions on regional and international issues.
Mr. Modi has not appointed a chief economic advisor yet. So I'll take the privilege of saying, well, let me do the job for him. If you were the chief economic advisor to Mr. Modi, what would you tell him to do right now?
The real problem is that how do you spend the money for social spending? We can all want it. Even the Narendra Modi government is talking about increasing spending on housing, increasing spending on distribution of monies for different schemes and so on. The problem is not that. The question is, can you really find the resources for it? And I think this is where, if you don't do it with resources, what will you get? You will get the UPA2 problem. Secondly, it generates revenues. Once it has generated the revenues, you can spend money on education, healthcare, etc., etc. So you get a double whammy, twofold effect.
In order to get the growth, you need to make big-ticket reforms. And to make big-ticket reforms, you have to overcome all kinds of political lobbies, your own constituency. We heard this morning about FDI in retail and so forth, because they are worried about the small shopkeepers and so forth. So how do you, in reality, with political compulsions, get over this? Can Modi get over these obstacles in order to make the big-ticket reforms?
Things have changed. Things are changing. And it seems to me that in politics, I mean, the kind of view I have, Arun, is that you cannot, what I look for is a prime minister, and that included my friend Manmohan Singh at one time, in UPA 1 certainly and earlier. You're looking for someone who is making the change, who is moving in the right direction. But as you point out, in politics, in democratic politics, you have to watch yourself, right? You can't expect rapid speed. I mean, that can be that can be chaotic. You can be bundled out of power. So what I'm looking for is that you're really moving in the right direction, not as fast as I would want as purely an intellectual wanting reforms. But I think this is where, so far, I'm not disappointed at all. I mean, I wish there had been some more dramatic moves, but there have been some dramatic moves on the non-economic side so far. I mean, on governance and so on. We can discuss that.
Let's
but I think
look
that's
at the
really
food
something.
security bill, right? That's a huge, could be a huge burden on the economy. Can he politically actually go and say that he's going to change that, or he must live up to it?
No, vis-a-vis the WTO, he has to. Because I think the mistake of the previous government was that they did not really, Anand Sharma was a very good man, but he was overwhelmed by the same people, by the people around the dynasty, as it were, who are not economically trained, into pushing for security, food security the way they understood it. Right. They didn't understand its incompatibility of the way they phrased it with our WTO commitments. I think the Prime Minister is going to have to change that. And my prediction, again, is that we can maintain food security, but not in the way in which we were trying to do it at Bali. That around September or October, we should be able to move away from the position we took. And it's also more important because I think the thing that the Prime Minister can do, he's got to scale up what he did in Gujarat, you see. In Gujarat, what did he do? I mean, of course, he's a Gujarati. Therefore, he's not afraid of trade. I'm a Gujarati, but I'm afraid of trade, but that's why I became a professor. I'm not a really effective Gujarati. When I want to impress people in Gujarat, I translate my salary into rupees at the going exchange rate. Then they say, they tell my parents, no, he's not really a failure. So in Gujarat, people are not afraid of trade. They think the other guy should be afraid of trade, not they. They're able to compete. And that's the attitude.
Why do you need an Ivy League model necessarily for a country like India?
No, as I have said, on that we have to work on all the margins. You have to have Ivy Leagues and you have to have for the people down below. And we also cost-wise, you have to have the universities that are not terribly expensive, and you have to have universities where you would actually feel like you pay here. So that's it. But to your online exploitation, here UGC again comes in the way, our rules and regulations. Indira Gandhi Open University, if it is located in UP and it starts giving, this is an open university by the way, right? If it starts giving education in Rajasthan, that will be questioned, not just by the UGC or the Supreme Court too. I mean, the rules and regulations in the Indian system are just unbelievable.
Quickly on the vocational side, this debate has been going on for a long time in India. And I'll tell you on the ground level, the biggest problem is that we are not creating enough jobs. The guy who wants vocational training goes there because he wants a job at the end of it. So the moment a hotel starts, that hotel management institute starts to flourish. But if you are not going to get them a job, then just doing vocational training to say that we have trained people doesn't get you anywhere.
I totally agree with you. And in fact, this is where the growth of the economy is really
Absolutely.
the crucial thing. And even some of the basic training you get on the job.
Sure.
I mean, the vocational institutions can help. But largely, you know, in any case, you know, what are you going to train them for? I mean, does the government know? I mean, if they knew, the planning commission would have been a resounding success. No. But, you know, are you going to train them as auto workers?
This goes back. This goes back. Let me point out on this.
So let me just finish. All right. So, what do you give vocational training for? Ultimately, I think the demand has to originate in the industry. And there is a collaboration between the educational institutions and the
industry. That's exactly what we emphasized in the UPA. Two things. One, we insisted that you cannot open a polytechnic in India now unless that polytechnic is affiliated to a nearby industry within 30 kilometers distance of the polytechnic. If there is no such industry, you can't open the polytechnic anymore. You won't get a license.
Now, but the reason that will not do either, because tomorrow that industry will go away. I mean, how do you know the industry is going to stay there?
At least this way, you're not having people teaching students vocational training on the basis of what they learned in their textbooks 30 years ago, but you're connected to an ongoing functioning industry today. Whether it lasts tomorrow is a different matter, using the processes of today and the real world of today. That's one thing. The other thing, of course, we've created in the last year of UPA was the community college concept, borrowed from the Western world in America and Australia and elsewhere, where you essentially, the kids who haven't done well in academics in school can get into a community college where they will have a mixture of academic courses and vocational courses. If they do well in the academics, they can still pass out and go into a regular university. If, on the other hand, they don't have an academic talent, they will learn some useful skills that they could take into the economy. But as Professor Panagare says, the economy has to grow to absorb.